Our parallel universe has no moon? What does this parallel universe look like? Want to know? I sure do. In our parallel universe, in 1983, there was much fear that spread worldwide as it was announced that there was a big meteorite headed our way. Scientists went into a panic, and the world's greatest minds for thinking crazy solutions came together in San Jose, California. It was decided that they would do their best to deter this meteorite from its straight journey to our home planet Earth. They decided on a two-phase plan. Number 1, the first phase, to slowly chip away at the meteorite with their limited breakthrough technologies. And phase 2, when the meteorite came close enough, they would do their best to blast it out of the atmosphere. In 1984, they began phase 1. And then, in 1985, the second phase began its preparation. At this point, every individual on the face of this planet could see the massive meteorite close to our moon. When they looked up into the sky, they could see the meteorite in the sky close to our moon. For 10 months, it was a daily visual reminder that if the scientists could not blow up this meteorite, it would be headed for the Earth and would wipe out 1/3 of the population of this Earth. So the scientists speculated. In October of 1985, phase 2 was about to be implemented. Here is what happened. They only had one chance to get it right, because if they got the alignment off from their target point, it could be devastating to life on Earth. Well, as was said, they were limited in the technology that we have here today. On October the 17th, 1985, the world stood still at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Many were standing outside of their homes, while the rest were glued to the TV and watching a live broadcast. The moment they had all anticipated and feared was about to occur. A laser-guided missile, guided by a rocket, was shot up into the atmosphere from Washington, USA. Excitement was building in the air as everything appeared to be going as planned, but then, oh no, from Earth, people could see that instead of the meteorite that was 22 miles long, blowing up into 1,000,000 bits that would dissipate and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, what happened instead left the world dumbfounded. The missile only shot the meteorite off of its course. You would think that that was great, but no. It was now headed directly for our moon. Within minutes, they could no longer see the meteorite, but visually an explosion could be seen on the moon. Now I'd like to remind you that this is pertaining to a parallel universe of Earth. Not what we've actually experienced here, but of a parallel universe to Earth. Let's continue. What happened? The world continued to stand still as people were left confused and bewildered. Slowly, as people looked up into the sky towards the moon, they could see that the moon was beginning to grow smaller and smaller. Within 3 hours, the moon was now the size of the head of a pencil. Reports were coming in from those on the beaches that the flowing of the waves had stopped. An eerie stillness came over the waters. Those who had always experienced the tides to be at a certain point on the sands of the beaches was no longer there. Looking over the oceans, one could only see an ever so slight rippling, because we know that the moon is the dominant force for our ocean tides. Other people began to report that there was an extreme temperature rise with a blaring heat of sunlight upon them, to the point where many were having to cover their eyes with whatever they could find handy. Many who were not clothed properly were starting to burn from the blaring sun, while others began to notice the daylight, the sunlight was disappearing into the dark of night. And here it was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What was once a beautiful warm day was turning into a bone-chilling, freezing day. Many stammering to find extra clothing and to cover their face and hands from getting frostbite. The Earth's axis points were shifting, leaving a perceived 6 months of darkness and 6 months of extreme heat and light, depending on what part of the world you were living, as told by the world's leading minds on all of the news stations. And then people wondered, what about the sea life? What about the animals and the life within the sea, the ocean? One sea creature to be affected is a shell organism, the nautilus, that would every month create a new shell that it moves into after the moon completes 1 full rotation around the Earth. Each day the organism adds a layer to this shell. Without the moon, this organism would never be able to move into a new home. Scientists also on the news stations began to report of what they anticipated would happen next. We know that the moon affects the gravitational pull on the Earth. At different points, the Earth and moon act together in orbit to rotate around the sun. Now, with the moon completely disappearing from view, the moon will no longer be able to keep the balance within Earth's orbit and its journey around the sun. Where would the Earth go? No one knew, because there were so many variables. But one thing was for certain: the temperatures experienced in their daily living would soon no longer exist. The scientists reported that without the effects of ocean currents, there would be major climate change. They began to report also on what would happen with the plant life and the lack of growth. World-renowned psychologists began to report about the mood swings that were beginning to happen. They began to collaborate on the research that was already done on how the tides from the full moons affects our own moods. They began to also report of where people who don't see daylight, how sleep patterns are affected and what that would do to the health of our own bodies. They reported on what happens with the body when melatonin is restricted and the effects that it would have on our long-term memories. They also reported on how the lack of daylight in our lives also affects our temperaments. And for those who were experiencing 6 months of daylight, how they would feel sleep deprived, confusion of the mind, feeling exhaustion. And for those experiencing 6 months of darkness, how the increase of the severity of depression in many people and animals would happen. And finally, the total imbalance of all of our ecosystems by those nocturnal animals and insects. So you see, we here in this universe, separated from the parallel universe, how grateful we are for our moon, for without the moon, these things would happen. So tonight, when you look out the window and look up into the sky and see the moon, be thankful, be grateful that we have a moon in this universe. So in making special note, this is not based on a true story, or is it? Though it may not be a factual history of our parallel universe, the chain of events that would happen if we had no moon are certainly indeed factual. Dum dum dum. I hope you enjoyed this. Until next time, stay tuned.